Let's lead and live in a whole new way.
Hey, friends, and welcome to another episode of Less Stress, More Joy with Amy Leneker. It's me, Amy. And today we are going to be talking about stress and joy by generation. And specifically, we are going to be looking at how stress impacts Generation Z really differently than how it impacts other generations. So if you are Generation Z, if you love someone who's Generation Z, or if you work with someone who's Generation Z, so basically everyone in the world, I think is going to get something out of this episode. So sit back, take a deep breath, and let's dive in. I wanted to talk today about stress and joy by generation because I just wrapped a national study. It's an annual study on stress and joy at work. And friends, let me tell you, the data are wild. And and if it's not already clear, yes, I do love data, perhaps more than the average person, but honestly, the data that we got back is nothing short of wild. So today I want to talk specifically about what we learned about stress when it comes to generations. When we did our generation breakdown, we did it in 5 different generations. And so many times when I'm talking to leaders and talking to teams, they think about just having 4 generations in our workplace. They think about Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and boomers. But in reality, when we did our research, we broke up millennials into 2 different groups. So we had younger millennials who are between 30 and 36. We had older millennials who are between 37 and 45. And then, of course, all of you Gen Xers out there, I am one of you. Those of us, we are 46 to 59, and then boomers 60 to 65. And so that leaves Gen Z as those who are 18 to 29. And I want to talk specifically about Gen Z today because what I learned is, well, there's 2 things. There's 2 things that I hope you remember from this episode. The first one is that younger generations are experiencing work stress significantly more often than older generations. And significantly, if we were together, I would highlight it and I would put it in front of you. I would say, this is significantly more. So, those of you who are listening who are part of Gen X or you're a boomer and you're managing a team, or maybe you're even managing an entire organization, we have to understand that the way Generation Z and frankly, younger and older millennials too, but not to the same degree as Generation Z, the way that they're experiencing stress at work is different. They are experiencing it significantly more often. And the second thing is that not only are they experiencing it more often, but it's actually having more of a negative impact on them. And that's what I want to talk about today because I work with hundreds, if not thousands, of leaders and teams every year. And as many of you know, those of you who are loyal listeners, thank you. I hope there are some of you, other than just my mom out there, who are loyal listeners. You know that I am a certified mediator and I specialize in workplace conflict. So I go into organizations and I help colleagues, I help entire teams resolve really tough conflict. And what I've been noticing is that there really is a generational difference in how people are talking about stress and how they're communicating the impact of stress. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to include it in my national study because I wanted to see, does the data back up what I'm seeing in mediation after mediation after mediation? Is it possible that there is a pattern here, that there is something unique about Gen Z and younger, older millennials when it comes to stress at work? And now we know the answer is unequivocally yes. So, to understand that they are experiencing it more often and that it's having more of a negative impact, is really important for anyone who is leading or managing or supervising a team with younger generations on it. Because if you are doing what you're doing for your peers or for older generations, it's not going to work. So let's talk about a few things that you can do. This podcast isn't designed to just spread doom and gloom. What kind of a joyful podcast would that be? So I wanted to share with you, yes, these are some of the findings and what in the world can we do about it? So when we look at the 5 kinds of work stress, the number one that Gen Z felt the most often was sudden stress. The 5 types of work stress, we've got schedule stress, when there is just too much to do and not enough time. We have suspense stress. That's when something is going to happen or a decision is going to be made, but it hasn't happened yet. And so there's uncertainty, there's ambiguity. Type 3 is social stress. This is the stress of people, it's the stress of relationships. When the people around you, the relationships you have, are making it harder to do your work than easier. Type 4 is sudden stress. It's the stress that arrives unannounced and it demands a response. And the fifth one is system stress. It is the stress from the structures at work, the systems, the culture, the processes that are not set up for everyone to succeed. Things like inequality and overwork and the things that are baked into the system that are making it more challenging. So, when we look at those 5 types of work stress, Gen Z in particular, just under 80% of Gen Z said that they are feeling sudden stress once a week or more. And for some, it was daily. This is a really important insight for us because we have to understand to what degree are we causing sudden stress for other people on our team. Very well intentioned people can create a lot of stress for people around them, and it happens with sudden stress all the time. Someone is late on their deadline, and now that makes the next person late on theirs, or your crisis becomes someone else's emergency, or there just isn't enough planning. And so everything feels like a crisis. One thing we can do to mitigate against some of the sudden stress is by building in some buffer time. If you know that you are in a job where there are things that are going to come at you unexpectedly, it's part of the work that you do, then building in that buffer, almost as if you were doing a project management plan, how you build in that buffer time. It's the same thing at work. So if you're building your team and their capacity is at 100%, you've already set yourself up to fail because now any sudden stress that comes is going to push you over the limit. Versus if you plan for maybe a 75% capacity or an 80% capacity, now you've got some buffer to absorb it. So again, just under 80% of Gen Z is saying, I am feeling this every week, if not every day. It was just under 75% for younger millennials. And so, to be really thoughtful, if you have younger generations on your team, in your workplace, are you paying attention to sudden stress? The other type of stress, and of course, let's just be clear that all 5 are important. So, there is never a time where we can say, oh, that type of stress, that's not important to me. Of course, all 5 are important. And I wanted to share with you what the data can tell us about where to focus your time. So, where do you start? Yes, we're going to look at all 5, but if you wanted to know where to start, I would start with sudden stress, not only because it impacts younger generations the most, but also because across all generations, sudden stress was shown to have the most negative impact. It was the one that prevented joy the most. The one that got in the way of positive workplace outcomes was sudden stress. The second I would encourage you to think about is schedule stress. And here's why. Schedule stress, the one of you've got too much to do, you don't have enough time, that was by far the most prevalent type of stress. So if you're looking just at frequency, schedule stress wins. Or even to say win, it doesn't quite make sense because you're winning something that's not good. But schedule stress occurred the most often. And even though it occurred the most often, it was sudden stress that has the greatest impact. When we think about schedule stress, there are several things that we can do to make it better. And these ideas are not groundbreaking. If you're on a walk, you're probably not going to have to pause and take a deep breath. If you are driving, you're probably not going to have to pull over on the side of the road just to get your head around what I'm saying. These are things we already know, and yet they are just not standard operating procedure in so many organizations. So, a few things about schedule stress is looking at how many meetings are you having and why. Meetings create schedule stress if they're of low value. Meetings create schedule stress if they are happening back to back to back. And we have seen research from Microsoft. They monitored people's brains through the day and they were able to look at how individuals' brains responded when their schedule did not allow for any time in between meetings. And they looked at what happened in those people's brains who did have time in between meetings. They found that even a short break between meetings allows your brain to reset. And so instead of stress compounding and compounding and compounding through the day, that little break was enough to reset. I think this is especially important for people who are working remotely. When you're on site in an organization, breaks are often built in naturally. You might have to walk from one building to another, or you might have to move conference rooms. I mean, there might be some built in buffer that frankly disappears when you're remote because you can just go from Zoom to Zoom or from Teams to Teams without having any type of a break. It should also be noted that this mini break that you're going to take between meetings, you can't be checking email. That doesn't work. If you take a 10-minute break, but you dive into email, you're responding to all of the crises of the day, your brain is actually not resetting. So a couple things we can do for schedule stress. Can we reduce the number of meetings and can we build in a buffer for the meetings that have to stay? At the top of this episode, I shared that not only do younger generations experience stress more often, but they report being more impacted by it. And I have seen many, many painful work conversations where there is a disconnect about the impact of work stress. And while we certainly can't stereotype, we can look at what this brand new data shows us to say that Gen Z, younger millennials, are experiencing stress at work in a way that is impacting them more. I have coached, I don't even know how many leaders who are Gen X and who are boomers who have said things like, why can't they just figure it out? Or we're all adults. This is work. It's not my job to be your mom. It's not my job to be your friend. Figure it out. I had to figure it out. Well, number one, that's unkind. That's not a helpful response. And number two, it completely misses the boat of what we've just learned in this brand new data that yes, it's possible that they are experiencing stress differently. It's possible that you're on the same team going through something similar and the impact on them is different. Anytime we look at generational data or frankly any data that segregates into specific types of people or characteristics of people, It's never about stereotyping. So I'm not encouraging you to go back into work tomorrow or even later today and start putting all of these practices into place for Gen Z or younger millennials. The goal is to use this as a conversation starter. The goal would be to say, hey, I just listened to this podcast, or there'll be a link in the notes that will include a link to the national study. You'll get the full report there. You could even say, I just read this report and here's what it showed for Gen Z. Does that line up with your experience here? Now we're getting somewhere. It's not about assuming that someone is feeling and believing all of the ways that the generations show. It's about asking what's true for them. And once you know that, once you understand that, then as a team, you can start to look at some solutions. You might have a Gen Z colleague and you might say, gosh, I just listened to this podcast and they said that Gen Z is most likely to feel stress more at work, and they have it has more of a negative impact on them. Does that line up with your experience here? And they might say, no, not at all. I've never felt less stressed in a job. So again, it's not about putting something into place immediately. It's about using this new data to create a conversation where together you can start to build some systems and build in some standard operating procedures to make it better for everyone. And even though this episode, we are looking primarily at Gen Z and younger millennials, there is no question that stress impacts all five generations at work. We found that over 80% say that they feel all five types of work stress. So 80% of American workers across generations are experiencing stress in all five of those types. It just so happens that the younger generations feel it more often and they feel it more strongly. The last thing I wanted to talk about today regarding younger generations is that they experience more barriers to joy at work than older generations. In the national study, I wanted to understand what is driving stress. And I wanted to know by generation, I wanted to know by your role in the organization, and I wanted to know by how you work, if you're remote or in person or hybrid. So we'll have lots of time on future episodes to dig into what we've learned. And again, you can get the full study report in the show notes. But younger generations experience more barriers to joy. So it's not enough just to study stress, because we can do that. And it's not enough to just study joy, because we can do that too. What I wanted to do was to study the intersection between stress and joy. Does one impact the other? And if so, how? What can we learn from that to fundamentally change the way we're working? And the data are clear that the answer is yes. Stress and joy are not operating in silos. They are interacting, they are intersecting, they are impacting each other throughout work. And younger generations in particular, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, they were most likely to have barriers to joy. And we studied dozens of workplace situations that possibly could have barriers to joy at work. And across all of them, Gen Z and younger millennials scored the highest. The biggest one for younger generations was overwhelming workload. This idea that I don't have enough time to do what I need to do. And if you've been listening to this for a while, I hope in your mind you just said, well, that's schedule stress. That makes sense. So they're experiencing that barrier to joy. So if you're at work and you take some steps to think through schedule stress, it's not just a stress strategy. It's not just a wellness strategy. It's a joy strategy. By recognizing and then mitigating against these barriers to joy, we're able to do something really drastically different. So let's look at just a top five. Again, if you want the dozens of them, you can see them in the full report, but let's just do the top five. So the top 5 barriers to joy for younger generations. Number 1, overwhelming workload. Number 2, feeling underappreciated. Number 3, sudden changes. There's your sudden stress. Number 4, and this one surprised me. This was not on my bingo card. I would have never thought that this would make the top 10, let alone make the top 5. Number 4 was technology problems that disrupt my day. And number 5 was feeling isolated or disconnected. So if you have been noticing a lot of stress at work, particularly among younger generations, here are 5 things that you can do to reduce some of those barriers to joy. Have a conversation about overwhelming workload. Have a conversation about, are they feeling appreciated? Are they feeling sudden stress? Is there technology problems that disrupt their day? And then certainly on number 5, feeling isolated or disconnected. When we look at why we need to understand the barriers to joy, it's because joy is not just a nice to have. Joy is not some touchy, feely, fluffy emotion that we get after everything else is accomplished. It's the opposite. Joy is what helps us weather stress at work. And what we found is that American workers are saying, not only do I want less stress and more joy, but 57% said, I am feeling far less joy at work than I want. And I have no doubt that you know someone, I believe that you do, because I know that I do. I believe that you know someone who would say, why are we talking about joy? This is work. It's called work for a reason. It's not my job to help you feel joy during the day. Well, here's what I'm going to tell you, and here's what the data are going to tell you. You can absolutely believe that. You can absolutely show up every day as a leader not believing that joy is important. The data say otherwise. Here's what it says. 79% of American workers, so we're talking over 2/3, 79% of American workers say that joy is necessary for me to do my best work. What other data point do you need than just under 80% of American workers say, I need joy in order to do my best work? And you want to know what's even more wild than that? What's even more wild than just under 80% is the fact that it jumps to 89% for executives. 89%. So just under 90% of executives say, I need joy in order to do my best work. And yet, do you know how many exploratory calls I do with executives where they say, with all due respect, we're not that interested in joy? Okay, maybe that's true, but let's just say that just under 90% of your colleagues on this executive team are probably really invested in joy. So I want to wrap up here because I've always promised that these podcasts would be short and clear and to the point. So let's do a really quick wrap up of what we talked about today. We learned that younger generations are experiencing all 5 types of work stress more frequently than older generations. We learned that not only are they experiencing it more frequently, it's also having more of a negative impact on them. And the third thing we talked about is that younger generations are also experiencing more barriers to joy at work. I hope that this episode gave you at least one small thing that you can do differently. One small conversation that you can begin to have in the workplace so that you can have less stress, more joy, and zero toxic positivity. If you liked this episode, and I hope that you did, please share it with a friend. Please comment. You can also pre-order my new book, Cheers to Monday, The Surprisingly Simple Strategy to Lead and Live with Less Stress and More Joy, everywhere books are sold. If you've got a question that you want to talk about on a future podcast, drop it in the comments. We read them all and we try our best to incorporate them in future shows. Shoot me an email, amy@amyleneker.com. I read every single message. I would love to hear what you have to say. And I can't wait to see you next week. Less stress, more joy, zero toxic positivity. That's the George Logan value.